Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hi if you're online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name's Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here. I'm a white man in my 40s with long hair and a beard, wearing a black t-shirt advertising the band Kneecap. Pretty good, check them out. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? 1, yes, welcome. This bit is for you. 2. 1 and 1 shy one. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UWE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and make some time for collaboration. Few quick notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can make a cup of tea or coffee, grab a glass of water. We have a quiet space just next to this space. So my left, your right, just through that wall there, there is a little space. Got some sofas and beanbags and things, reasonably well soundproofed. If you need to take a break at any point, you can pop in there. We're not expecting a fire drill today. So if you hear the fire alarm, probably real. We're going to direct you towards the fire exits, which are, again, at the other end of the studio, my left, your right, at either end. And then there are accessible toilets, including baby change, over there in the corridor next to the kitchen. There'll be a Q&A at the end of the talk. For those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Loughton will be your voice in the room today, but he's not here yet, so who knows? If you're in the building, raise your hand and we'll send around a microphone so that the folks at home can hear what you're saying. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, at pmstudiouk.bsky.social on Blue Sky, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. If you are following us on Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X, that's the way around, we're not posting on there anymore because we don't think that's a good thing to do. So if you're using that to get information from us, please update your feeds. Anyway, our speaker for today is Frances Bossom. Fran is an artist and a PhD student at UWE Bristol. Earlier this month, she transformed Arnolfini's dark studio into an office circa 1990 with fax machines, an electric typewriter and telephones. And today she's going to talk about how media archaeology can open up research in institutional archives, what happens when you perform administration with old media, and how we can remember through technology. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Fran.
I'm going to begin today with an OHP. It's very beautiful. It's Watersheds, and I believe it dates from about the 90s. So I'm going to talk about media archaeology in the archives, and what I'm planning on doing is introducing a practice that I've developed, which I call archival reactivation, and I'm going to share my research process, and I'm going to talk about transmissions and media archaeology of gallery education, which took place at Arnolfini at the beginning of the month. I'm not going to do the whole thing on OHP, but I just wanted to start this way. And then there's going to be some reflection at the end on what emerged out of that exhibition for me. So what I want to do, first of all, is just introduce kind of the principles of archival reactivation, which draw on media archaeology. So to begin with, it's about drawing the recent past and living memory into the present. So that's one really important aspect of this practice. It's about reusing analogue technology, which is what's happening right now on a live stream. And I quite like the ridiculousness of that. That's not lost on me. And And it's about looking at communication and dialogue, the history of that, the traces of that. And also, it's hands-on. It's multisensory and playful and performative. So if we weren't in a talk format, I would be wanting to share this technology and for you to engage with it. But we're in a talk format, so I'm kind of showing it to you. But archival reactivation is hands-on. And it's about the materiality and object life of not only archives, paper-based archives, but also analogue technology that is related to those archives. And it's intergenerational and collaborative. And so hopefully I'll be able to share some of that research process with you today, and you'll see what that means as we go along. And I'm interested in everyday media. I'm not interested in kind of high-spec tech. I'm interested in the ordinary and the everyday. So those are the principles of archival reactivation that I'm bringing to archives when I'm looking at paper-based archives. And the archives that I'm looking at in my research are Arnolfini's gallery education archives. So I'm going to turn this off now. I know it's because it's kind of like for some of you, you might be feeling quite emotional about this, and I really do understand, but it's kind of like we're going to turn this off now, and then we're going to go and revert to a PowerPoint, which is a shame, but I feel like I need to do that because I need to show you some images. But lovely as this is, so goodbye, and then. It's good, isn't it? Sorry, I really enjoyed that. So that's what we've just talked about. And I have to kind of pay homage to Annie van den Overs. And that PowerPoint presentation was a bit of a homage to her keynote talk at the Media Archaeology Summer School in Antwerp in August, and she began her keynote with an OHP, and immediately I was transported back to my own associations with that technology. And she was talking in that presentation about what she sees as the main principles of media archaeology, and they overlap a bit with what I've been talking about with archival reactivation. And Annie has written extensively about media archaeology, and I can reference some kind of books for people that, or a reading list for people that are interested. She's amazing, but she really emphasises that hands-on sensory approach to working with media. And so what does media archaeology have to do with gallery education, and more specifically, the history of gallery education at Arnolfini? So this is all part of my PhD research, which focuses on Arnolfini's gallery education archives. And Arnolfini, for those of you who don't know, is a contemporary art centre, and so it sits on the other side of the docks from Watershed. It was founded in 1961, but it moved to its current location 50 years ago, and it's at that point in the mid-70s when Arnolfini expanded and moved to its current location that it began employing staff who were specifically, it was their job to develop education resources and activities and talks. The image on your left is the blue and white image is an education and activities supplement that was published by Arnolfini in 1983. And then on the right is a screenshot of Arnolfini's website. And so it's kind of the image on the left is showing a programme of artist workshops, clubs, activities for visiting groups, tours, talks, seminars, performances. And then on the right, Arnolfini currently offers something which isn't exactly the same, but it's not too dissimilar. So it's kind of on the first line, it's talking about, has talks, a live programme, it has activities for families, workshops, tours and communities. And in the 1970s to 1990s, gallery educators at Arnolfini created resources for visitors and developed partnerships with artists and communities. And they were also working in a variety of contexts, including day centres, hospitals, prisons, schools and universities and so on. And Arnolfini still offers a similar type of activity, but rather than education, it refers to those programmes as engagement. And they co-produce those programmes with project partners. But this lays the context for what I'm talking about when it comes to gallery education. So in terms of archives, Arnolfini's archives aren't held in Arnolfini's building. They're held in a completely separate archive institution, Bristol Archives. So the main focus of my PhD research has been paper-based archives, going up to the point that Arnolfini started or connected to the internet. And so the image on your left shows Arnolfini's collection, records collection, on the shelves in storage at Bristol Archives. And then I've been working with 16 boxes of papers. So the open box shows a number of files. So I've been sifting through papers that were produced by gallery educators in the 70s, 80s and 90s at Arnolfini. There's also boxes and boxes of unlabelled photographs and negatives and slides. So I've been kind of leafing through those, sort of figuring out what's what and trying to kind of create a catalogue for those. And in the top right is the search room at Bristol Archives. So I'm looking at all of this stuff in a location that is completely divorced from the place that produced it. But the staff at Bristol Archives are amazing. They're brilliant. And they've been so supportive of the research as well. And so in these boxes, I'm finding all of these papers. And I've been slowly taking time to hold each one. And it's given me time to notice how they've been made. And it's given me time to think about how they've been circulated. And it's given me time to think about the object life of each piece of paper that I'm holding. So I'm not just asking myself, what do the words say? I'm trying to figure out how they've been made, how they've been circulated. And Bracknell and Russell say that documents and archive records have an object life as well as a text life. They interact just as objects do. They have social agency and voice beyond the mere embodiment of their texts into voice. And so here there's a gallery educator's personal notebook. There's a report detailing what was happening at Arnolfini. There's research notes, a telephone message, ideas for conference themes. There's a memo. So there's all of these different papers that are serving all of these different functions. So this is all before we had email. And this is all before we had, what else did we have? Letters. Before we sent each other letters in the post. And artist Kylie Banyard acknowledges the object life of archives that she works with, and she describes her process to working with archives as feeling archives, and she talks about it being a deeply pleasurable and embodied mode of viewing, and I can really relate to that. When I'm in the archives, I'm definitely feeling them. And so looking beyond the text and performing the object life of the archives that I'm working with is very much part of archival reactivation. And there are moments in the archive when I stumble across myself. So I used to work at Arnolfini in the 90s in gallery education. So it's quite faint, the image, but on the left-hand side is a document that I sent by fax in the 90s. So, and then on the right is an example of a fax print on thermal paper that has disappeared. So analogue faxes in the 90s, when they printed on thermal paper, it's not using ink, it's using heated printer heads. And so the image of what is produced on a fax is produced by a process of, it's a chemical reaction, basically. So on the left is something that I sent, and on the right is something that was received. And as you can see, it's disappearing. And and so after encountering these documents in the archive, I kind of did what anyone would do, and I started buying fax machines. And if you're interested in fax machines, you can they're just so many people are getting rid of them at the moment. So if you spot any or anyone's chucking one out, I'd really love that. And so I began kind of playing with fax technology. So just to kind of recap, gallery educators are administrating their work at Arnolfini, picture of Arnolfini. Arnolfini then takes its archive material and deposits it in the Create Centre, which there's an image of the Create Centre there, Bristol Archives are part of that. It then gets formally accessioned and ordered into files, and there's a catalogue. So that's what I'm encountering when I go into the archive. So I go into the archive and go, oh, this is lovely. This is really fascinating. And then with that kind of material, what I'm doing is I'm remembering, or it's drawing up my own memories of using that kind of tech and being at Arnolfini at that time. So I start collecting old media, and I begin dreaming of reactivating it, or I begin dreaming of remaking it. And I've got to stop pointing. I'm really worried about but I'll try not to do that. And so I was really excited about the idea of reusing telecoms, old analogue telecom, but of course I can't just plug my analogue devices into digital phone lines. They don't work. And so I had a friend who works in the NHS, and she was going to fax me. She said, it's fine, I'll fax you. We've got faxes, it's going to be okay. And in 2022, July 22, she went into the office, and on the day she was going to fax me at home, she said, I can't. All of the fax machines are in a fax graveyard. And so I couldn't, I really, really wanted to retransmit this document that I'd sent in 1996. I wanted to find a way of making that happen. So instead, I began making performances using the fax machine in copy mode, so it doesn't transmit to another machine. And I recreated the illusion of a fax transmission by playing a fax signal on my phone. And then I met the amazing Tarim, who is sat there at the back. So Tarim is a technologist, and he also has a whole network of telecoms enthusiasts and technologists who are really, really passionate about this stuff, old analogue tech, and they really want to, they're really engaged with it. And also that community is amazingly generous as well. And so Tarim had a friend, is it lbpk.net? That's Paul's Mastodon? No. Can't remember, but lpbk.net. He donated a PBX telephone exchange that he rescued from a garage in the Forest of Dean. So on the table, you can see behind the telephones, there's a grey rectangular box. That's a telephone exchange. And that enabled me, so Tarim worked tirelessly, and finally I was able to retransmit this document from the archives. And so this is a work in progress at the university, where I finally retransmit that data that I first sent in 1996. And before we managed to do it, I'd come into Pervasive Media every now and again and just sort of see Tarim and say, how's it going? And he'd be literally tearing his hair out because the phone sockets have different numbers of pins. And it was like this gigantic puzzle that he had to work out, but he managed it. So I was able to retransmit that data. But I really wanted to take that back to Arnolfini. I wanted to take the analogue fax machines, and I wanted to take this document back, and I needed to retransmit it on site. And so this is a still from a film that I made with Tom Stubbs from Bigger House Film. And in the film, it documents me returning to Arnolfini with my fax machines. I go to where the fax machine was at Arnolfini, which was the director's office, and it's now a toilet. So I'm in the toilet with my fax machines, reliving the dream. And at the end of the performance, I then take the fax print from the performance back into the archives. So it's all coming full circle. And so I've been working with material, I've been animating it, reactivating it, working with technology, and then the outputs of that then get fed back into the archive. So I'd just like to show you a short excerpt from the film where I achieved the pinnacle of my desire and I managed to transmit this data for the first time in the toilet. So.
I have with me a telephone exchange, copper wires, and a second telephone answering system with facsimile. Witness as I recreate a PSTN with beautifully engineered network of copper wires, cables, and exchanges. I will then use the second facsimile device to transmit my facsimile live to our machine here. This has not been attempted since 1996. Please wish me luck. Restart 110 to Moira Innes, Art Touring Avon from Arnolfini. Date 30th of April, number of pages 4. I am sending you the details about Inroads, a conference Arnolfini is holding on June the 28th. Please could you disseminate this information amongst those you work with. If you know of any other individuals or organisations who might like to hear about Inroads, please let me know. If you would like some Inroads leaflets, please contact me on the above tel or fax. Yours sincerely, Francis Bossom.
Transmission is complete.
That was quite something. It's becoming increasingly rare to find a functioning PSTN network in the UK, and the few that remain are due to be shut off for good by 2025. Each time a document is copied, it degrades slightly and breaks up. So too, this thermal paper is unstable. And I am mindful that all of this is in the act of disappearing right now.
Continue to copy that part of the script, and at the end of the film, I tear off the fax print with all of my words on it and the evidence of this retransmission, and I take it to Bristol Archives and I deposit it in the archives. And so at Bristol Archives, if you want to see the fax print from that performance, the file number is 46972/2. And then at the moment at Bristol Archives, I have curated the vitrine in the search room, and in the vitrine is the fax print, my script, but also documents that relate to the event that I was transmitting that fax about, which was a conference for that aimed to celebrate and explore different ways in which women could gain greater access to the arts, which included looking at telecoms and also mentoring. So that's going to be on until May, mid-May. And then earlier this month, I organised an event at Arnolfini, which was called Transmissions, a Media Archaeology of Gallery Education. So over 3 days, I worked with Taryn and with Taryn's support, and we transformed the office transformed the dark studio rather into an office. And I wanted to find a way of weaving together my interests with archive material, with artworks that I've been making throughout my research, and also media archaeology. So I organised a couple of displays in vitrines, and the first one was themed around dialogue and organising. So this was in the dark studio alongside the office, which I'll get to in a bit. In the vitrine, I selected documents that explored how gallery educators at Arnolfini connected with audiences and organised their work, so before the internet. And on the wall, I had this image from the archive of Lindsay Fryer, who is Arts Access Officer, and she's working at a desk in Arnolfini's gallery office, which is now one of the galleries, in about 1986. And the material that I put in the vitrine from Arnolfini's archives, I wanted it to feel like she'd just cleared out her drawer. And so there's artist workshop record sheets, there's conference tickets, there's contact sheets, slides, negatives, phone messages, memos, and so forth. So I've selected these documents because they're kind of exploring somehow how the people who worked at Arnolfini were connecting with others. I showed my film on a CRT monitor, so that was in the space as well. And then there was another vitrine exploring change. And so in that vitrine, I included reports and notebooks and research ideas and policy documents from the 1970s to 1990s. And that explored the changing way in which gallery educators were thinking about what their practice was or could be in the future. And then we get to the office. So on the plan on the left was my proposal, and that's the way in. And then next to the sofa is that there was a vitrine with a typewriter from the 70s in it, and then there was the dialogue and organising vitrine. And then round the corner from that, there was the TV monitor showing the film, and then the vitrine of documents exploring change. And then the large table in the middle of the plan is the table that you can see on the image. And so the way in which we set up the exhibition was that in 2 corners of the room, we had 2 more fax machines, and then we had telephones in each corner of the room, maybe not the far left, but we had telephones on the main table and a fax machine and a typewriter. So the tech that we were working with in the space, so you can see that fax machine in the top centre is an absolute beauty. 1991, it's my favourite thing. Taryn also drew in John Hannibal, who has an extraordinary collection of phones. And so you can see some of those on the table. So everything was interconnected, everything was wired together. So it was possible to call the fax machine, it was possible to transmit a fax in the space. And then there was one last element of the exhibition. There was these light boxes. So I took photographs of faxes that were fading in the archive, and I printed them on transparencies and then backlit them with a single LED. So these are fading faxes that are about 30 or 40 years old, and I photographed them. And I wanted to have those in the space. And we also had a kind of crafting activity as well, making paper cut telephones. So it was all going on. And it was bonkers. It's like over 3 days, we had 1,200 people come through the space. And I think we had a conversation. I mean, Taryn was there for kind of most of it as well. And it was extraordinary. It was so busy. It was really noisy. People were calling each other, typing. They were negotiating with strangers about leaving the fax machine alone so it could receive their fax. We had a very simple invitation to visitors. It was, you know, welcome to Arnolfini in the 1990s. This is a reimagined office from that time. You're welcome to come in and use the equipment. And we kept it very simple and open-ended. And visitors were invited to take their fax prints away with them or leave them on the office notice board. And there was something really powerful about saying to children that in 20 to 30 years' time, this document, this fax that you've just created is going to change radically. And there was something very powerful about that. And visitors seemed to follow or fall into sort of broad categories of being browsers. So there were people that came in and just wanted to have a look at the archival documents. That was their thing. There were people who were watchers who enjoyed watching people performing with the technology. And there were people who were telephoning, typing and faxing. They just were so engaged with the technology. That was what drew them in. And they wholeheartedly became part of the office. And there were discussers. There were people that wanted to talk to us about what was going on. And they wanted to share their memories of analogue technology and Arnolfini. And there were some people that did all three. Or maybe there's more than three. But and one visitor worked in galleries in the 1980s and totally clocked a lot of the references that I was making with the documents that I'd selected. So she was reading a kind of narrative around the history of gallery education through the items that I'd selected. But you didn't have to. You didn't have to know all that stuff. We had babies coming in with parents. I didn't document any of these. These are people who were happy to have their photograph taken, and I didn't want to interrupt the process by kind of running up to people with a permission form. These are kind of mostly people that I know. The scout group was amazing. That was mayhem. I think Taryn missed that bit. It was kind of like, that was quite exhausting. And you had older visitors talking to younger visitors about how awful fax machines were. And there were conversations about, there were kind of younger people, not to kind of, I don't want to kind of oversimplify, but some younger people were saying, oh, it must have been so much simpler in your day. Life must have been so much less stressful. And we were saying, not really. And there were fathers showing their children what a typewriter was that had never seen one. There were groups of friends reminiscing how they'd kind of played with the phone coil with their finger when they were talking to friends on the phone. And I watched people do it, and I hadn't seen that action in such a long time. So there were loads of moments like that. Somebody phoned their childhood number, but the PBX exchange transferred them to another phone in the space, and someone picked it up. And that completely freaked them out. Apparently they were quite rude. Some people poked their heads around the door and just sort of said, oh, sorry, because they thought it was an office. Taryn was an exhibit in his own right. So you can see him in the sort of top left-hand corner. He was the IT department, just making sure that things were running smoothly, and perhaps adding an extra phone or two, and maybe calling people and kind of sort of surprising them. At moments when I wasn't engaging with people and talking about this and talking to them about what they were doing or helping them transmit a fax, I kind of stepped back and I realised that I'd recreated that office that I'd worked in the 90s. Somehow there was something about the atmosphere that felt familiar. And it was an incredible learning experience. And I learned that the people that came to this event, some of them didn't know anything about it and just happened on it. They were so drawn in by the tech. They absolutely loved it. It was so well received. Some people didn't stay for long, but other people spent quite a while trying to get to grips with a typewriter. And how do you return to the beginning of the next line? How do you put a piece of paper in? It was joyful. it was joyful. People were making all sorts of connections. And this was a small one-off event, and I wonder what might happen if this was co-curated with a very particular community. And what we experienced in those 4 days was a drop in the ocean as to what could be possible with this kind of work. I also had a conversation with university staff and Arnolfini's head of engagement and a curator from Modern Art Oxford in the show, and that conversation took a different turn, and we started talking about how institutions connect with audiences and how institutional voice is held and communicated. And this connects to questions about how institutions think and make decisions and communicate, which has changed vastly over the 50 years in some ways, but a lot of the same questions are still being tackled, perhaps. And this is a way, in some ways, of talking about the invisible. And when participants realised that they had the potential to keep what they'd made for the future, they worried about not having faxed something of importance and value. And but we reassured them that actually the ordinary and the everyday is and flippant is as valuable as the very well considered and deliberately articulated idea. And offices are gaps and spaces where connections are made. And so just to go back to those principles of archival reactivation, archival reactivation is about the recent past and living memory. It's about reusing analogue technology. It's about reactivating communication and dialogue. It's hands-on, it's multisensory, it's performative, and it's playful. It's about the materiality and object life of archives and analogue media. It's intergenerational and collaborative, and it's about everyday media. And that's where I'll end it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fran. Any questions? Give you your microphone.
Lovely talk and absolutely fascinating. Very reminiscent of offices in the 1990s. What's the future of paper records? Because I've been doing family research and seeing my grandfather's death certificate with a signature on. I'm just wondering about the paper remains there, the paper records. Are they secure, or if they're duplicated, are they likely to be just digitized and lost?
That's a great question, and I would say I have some things to say to that. I'm not an archivist, and I don't know if there are any archivists in the room, but all I know is that Bristol Archives hold their paper archives and they care for them, and there inevitably is going to be some material that is that gets cleared out. But I mean, I don't know the answer to your question, but it's one that I'm really interested in, and this research is concerned with. So I can't answer it, but yeah, don't know.
Any other questions?
You mentioned a reading list at the beginning, like relevant texts and books. Would you be willing to kind of expand on that?
There you go. So it's kind of doing experimental media archaeology and doing experimental media archaeology. Annie van der Over's contributed to the theory one of that pair. Jussi Parikka, What is Media Archaeology? Brilliant text. Media Archaeology and Intermediate Performance. Wonderful. Lots of field guide to analogue tech. Materiality in the Archive came out last year. Artists in the Archive, fabulous book. And Remain with Ducombe, Parikka and Schneider. So people that are interested in reenactment might be aware of Rebecca Schneider's Performing the Remains. But this is, in this text, Remain. Schneider is writing with Jussi Parikka, who wrote What is Media Archaeology? And then books looking at gallery education and the history of gallery education. It's all mediating. which came out of a conference in Helsinki in 2013. It's brilliant. I've also been looking more generally at institutions, performing institutions, how institutions think. Art with People is an amazing publication from the 90s, AN publication. It's got some brilliant text in there looking at the history of community arts and also gallery education, and contemporary curating and museum education. And I'm also really aware of collectives like Education and Arts Research, and also CUMA. I can't remember what CUMMA stands for, but they have a lot of research around participation and museums and education. But were you interested in anything in particular?
Broad scope.
Yeah, cool.
I think there's a question here in the front row.
Thank you. Sorry if I missed the start, so sorry if I missed this, but my question was about how important the context of you recreating the office in the Arnolfini was the fact that it was still in the Arnolfini. Like, do you think that could work elsewhere or to the performance?
I think that my research very specifically is looking at Arnolfini's gallery education archives, and I think that this working with analogue technology in other institutions and curating and selecting material from an institution's archive and developing, I think it could be absolutely replicated in other institutions. And it also, I would love to recreate an office that isn't connected to an institution and just see where that went as well.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
I do love the full circle though.
Hi, I'm just wondering if you thought about archiving people's experiences with those technologies at the time. I mean, I remember certain features of using fax machines, like there was that moment when you dialed a number and you didn't get a person, you got a fax machine.
Yeah.
Or you would send a fax, but it had gone to some machine in some office. So it didn't mean that it had gone to the person that you actually wanted it to go to, and there was another step which you had no control over.
Yeah.
All those are sort of experiences of the technology in use at the time, which aren't manifest in the technology themselves, if you see what I mean. So I'm just wondering if you thought about getting some kind of oral history of the use of some of these technologies.
Yeah, thank you. I've been interviewing people that worked at Arnolfini before I did and at the time when I did, and I've raised the kind of topic of technology a little bit, but also it comes up in the archive, and so I can see in the Council of Management minutes in particular, you can see that there's a concern for whether or not the organisation has desktop publishing, and you can see them worrying about the internet. And you can there's one Council of Management minutes where the organisation's fax machine explodes, and they kind of go into it in like real detail about kind of what happened. So there's sort of first-hand sources at the time in the archive anyway, when the institution is talking about its concerns about technology. And kind of there's sort of a bit of a celebration when they finally connect to the internet in 1996. And the organisation at that point was receiving 4 emails a day, and they were printed out and put on people's desks. So yes, I'm seeking that out in the archive, but I'm also having conversations with people. But also, the kind of the contradiction is that gallery education and gallery educators tend not to want to be at their desks. It tends to be about working with people and making connections with people in kind of by talking and through workshops. But they still couldn't escape the admin, and I'm wondering what we can learn by looking at their reluctant admin. Yeah.
Michael.
That leads nicely on to a question that's formulating in my mind, which is, have you explored what sorts of things didn't get into the archive? Because the archive tends to reflect the things that are recorded, the things that are thought of important, and as you've just said, the admin. What about those things that you... Have you come across things that there are hints of that are missing from the archive, that are not there, but the existence of them exists to tell you what people have left out of that record.
Absolutely, and I would also, before I kind of sort of talk to that, I would say that Arnolfini's education department documents, of which there's 16 boxes, they are authored by people that worked at the institution. They're not necessarily authored by audiences and communities and visitors. So there are moments, like there's a box of questionnaires, and there was a scout group from Stockwood who put their address as outer space, and kind of on the kind of the questionnaires and things like that. So there's moments where you hear audiences' voices, but it is mainly authored by the institution. So there is an absence there that I am not necessarily working to, because I want to understand what actually is there. And in terms of absences, there's with the artist's workshop record sheets, I showed one of them. You couldn't see it in detail on the images that I shared, but Lindsay Fryer, who was gallery educator at the time, talked about how she had hundreds of them, but she loaned them to an art centre in Taunton, and they got lost. So there are stories of loss, and also Lindsay Fryer, again, there was the photograph of her at her desk, and I know that an awful lot of what's on her desk isn't in the archive. And I know that the files that I generated when I worked there aren't in the archive. So it is incredibly partial, as were the remnants that were left behind from the exhibition. I know that a lot of things that people came into the space to make got dispersed and taken away. So I was kind of quite interested in that as well.
There you go.
I just wanted to know what your route was into media archaeology, and sort of like what you did for your undergraduate and your academic journey.
Wow. Thank you. I did my sculpture degree at Falmouth 30 years ago. I graduated, which is really alarming. And then I came to Bristol and I started working and volunteering at Arnolfini, signing on the dole, which isn't an option for, it's kind of, I was very lucky, I didn't have to pay for my degree. I'm very aware of that privilege. And I was able to sign on and volunteer and get a studio and do all of that in the 90s. I became more and more involved at Arnolfini. I then worked full time there, and I became a self-employed artist after working there. So I was working all over the country in the 2000s, and then I haven't done an MA, and I'm doing the PhD with UWE at the moment. So my route into media archaeology is through loving fax machines. I had no idea when I started the PhD that I was going to be performing with fax machines. It emerged out of the research. Yeah, and I knew that I couldn't divorce what I was handling from what had created it, if that makes sense, yeah.
Anybody else? We got one online. There you go.
Thanks for that. You've been getting a lot of nice feedback online from the viewers. This isn't really a question, it's more of a reflection, but Ruth is wondering about ways of combining different types of technology together. She's been quite fascinated by the anachronistic sets of the TV show Severance and how they mismatched tech to create an office. So I guess my question is is her focus only on replicating as exactly as technically possible now, or playing with combining with other technologies?
Oh, interesting question. I mean, I did toy with the idea of connecting the Create Centre, Bristol Archives, with Arnolfini and transmitting faxes between the two. But because the telephone lines are not digital, I couldn't do that. And there are widgets that you can get that can turn analogue fax machines so that they can talk to digital phone lines. So there is a way of kind of circumnavigating that, but I didn't want to do it because I wanted my experience of retransmitting my document via fax to be as authentic as possible. So I'm really interested in an authentic, as much as you can be authentic, an authentic connection with that analogue technology. But the office that we recreated at Arnolfini was a nowhere space. in the 90s, Arnolfini didn't have a second floor, and it was a mishmash of tech from the early 90s through to the late 90s, and it wasn't a faithful reproduction. I'm not trying to kind of be, I wanted to say be a nerd, but I am. It's kind of like I'm not trying to kind of be authentic to the point of it becoming laborious and overwhelming, but I don't want to bring in digital trickery. Although one of the phones we had was a reproduction, I think. Yeah.
Anybody else got a question? If not, I will ask one actually. So fax machines, I'm just about old enough to remember using them. They were always a very serious, businessy, like, you know, of the technology of the day, they were the boring, businessy, serious thing. What does it mean for you to like take that and then make it into this playful novelty for people? Like, how does that relationship work?
Well, you sort of say that the fax machine for you has these businessy connotations. When I went to the Media Archaeology summer school, there were people there who were in their kind of 20s and 30s, and I remember saying to the, and also older than me, but I remember saying to the room, how many people have used a fax? And a lot of people in that space had used it for connecting with relatives who lived the other side of the world, and they played drawing games, and they were around about 30, so they had childhood memories of using this technology. And then when I've used, the more and more I talk to people about fax machines, the more and more stories people share with me about romances that they've had via fax, about kind of like Friday filthy joke time via fax, and kind of, so it's kind of, yes, they do have this kind of office association, but I think at the time people were playing with them too. So it feels very, it feels absolutely right and fine to be sharing this technology and inviting people to play with it and come to their own understanding of it. That feels very much like it aligns with the spirit of media archaeology to me.
One last.
Not a question, just a sort of general sort of reminisce. And that was, I remember in our organisation getting one, and it cost 500 quid, which was a lot of dosh in those days.
I can sell you one for cheaper now.
Anyway, that's a passing thought.
What year was that?
About 1991.
Wow.
Something like that. Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. Well, there we are.
What make was it? Sorry.
I'll tell you, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Sorry.
All memories get a little hazy then.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we had one back here.
Do you have any plans to do any more art installation? Because that one looked really good and really interesting. And the way that people are interacting with the technology is really very enlightening. Because when you think about it, possibly people don't interact socially today in the same way with the technology. So have you got anything more in the pipeline?
I haven't got anything more in the pipeline at the moment. I would love to do more of that. We have got all, Taram and I at the moment, Taram's got the PBX exchange and I've got the fax machines. And we would really like to find a way of making that kit open source so people could possibly borrow it. But we don't know where that could live. At the moment, we're kind of storing it in different places. But I've also got to write my PhD. So it's kind of like I need to kind of focus. But it would be amazing to do more of this play, definitely.
Yeah. One last, Michael.
Just an observation on non-office uses of fax machines. As far as I'm aware, the deaf signing community adopted fax machines very early on because they could scribble notes to each other when they couldn't use a standard telephone.
I'd love to have conversations with people who had that experience of using that technology. I'd love to do that.
And was there one quick one here at the front?
Really interesting to hear you say that actually you didn't know the direction this was going to take until you came across the fax machine. I'm really interested to know how important the actual archive of arts education was or has become in your journey, and whether you could have actually done this research in a completely different area because it's become so much driven by the media technology.
So do you mean I could have done this in a completely different field? Or, yeah.
Yeah, how important was the arts education elements?
Yeah.
And how significant is that becoming in your PhD? Or has that been sidetracked by the technology?
That's a really great question, and there's lots of things that spring to mind. First of all, I would talk about I would just sort of say as well, with Arnolfini's education department documents and its gallery education archive, it was never collected as systematically as the archives or the material from other departments. So exhibitions, live, bookshop, their archives tend to be much more coherent and cohere around a chronological programme, whereas the educators, and perhaps it was symptomatic of the first ones being part-time and also being at the very beginning of their careers, all sorts of factors, the education department documents have been collected much more sporadically. It feels much more chaotic. It's not led in the same way as the exhibition programme archives is. So that's one thing. And there are lots of researchers that have it's like Sarah Torres Vega looks at collecting the uncollectible and looks specifically at gallery education archives and how gallery educators and gallery education as a field typically suffers from memory loss. That's she's a Spanish researcher, so her work's really interesting. And Felicity Allen talks about this as well, about why gallery education archives tend to be partial. So that's one thing. And although the space that we created, the office that we created, was totally owned and taken over by the people that came through it, the whole time I'm reflecting on the archive and on Arnolfini's gallery education archive, and it's the way that people were working in the space animated the documents in my mind that I'd selected and put in the archives, and vice versa. So I'm still kind of very connected to all of that. And in a sense, that office is a form of pedagogy. It's a gallery. It's a kind of active gallery education in a way. Yeah. Does that answer your? Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Say thank you again to
Thank you.
All right, before you go, if you are interested in unusual communication technologies, tonight is our Winter Residency Showcase, where you can join us for an evening of experimental art and conversation with our 2025 Winter Artists in Residence, Nat Whitney and Geraint Edwards, who've been exploring this year's theme of actual reality. That's from 6:30 p.m. in Watershed 3 and streamed on YouTube. If you want to join us in person, then please book a free ticket on the website. If you want to stick around and hop desk today or find out more about what we do, then please come find one of the studio team and we'll be happy to help. Studio team, wave. Hey, Loughton knows I was going to do that. He did it even before I said it. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you all again next time.